big news was that Disney, a few months back, they had announced that they were no longer going to be marketing or distributing their CDs, Blu-rays, physical media of their films to Australia. It was a big deal. Then, quite recently, they announced that the Disney Movie Club was going away. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. The Disney Movie Club was not just some, it's a little way that Disney sold some of their movies. No, it was a big deal. You had a lot of exclusives that you could only buy on Blu-ray perhaps or whatever from the Disney Movie Club. And a lot of those exclusives weren't the new things. They were the older franchises, the older works that in some cases you could see Disney perhaps, especially some of the ideologues that work at Disney, perhaps not really wanting to come out and saturate culture anymore, not really be a part of culture. They've done the new DuckTales series, and they've worked on incorporating sort of a new Darkwing Duck into that. They like to take the old properties and remake them. And part of that you can argue is from a business standpoint, they think that there's more security in marketing a franchise that already has a built-in audience. But they changed these franchises, they changed these properties, these IPs so much from what the already established fan base loved about them that they are really quite unrecognizable in a lot of cases. And in a lot of cases, what they end up changing about these properties is they make them more woke friendly. They make them more in line with the ideology, the new way that Disney is trying to, that the ideologues at Disney anyhow are trying to remake culture, that new sort of utopian, but not a utopian. there's a wonderful song. I recommend this. It's actually an old 70s like punk song, I think, but it's called Our Love Will Change the World. And it showed up. Alice Cooper did a wonderful version of it on his Detroit Stories album, I believe. It is, just look it up on YouTube. Our Love Will Save the World by Alice Cooper. It really just so well defines the culture war and what's going on and the people and these ideologues who want to change it, and it's written as though it's from the perspective of the people, you imagine back in the day, probably the hippies or whatever, who were, in a lot of ways, the forerunners politically anyway, sociopolitically, of a lot of the ideologues today. But, our love will change the world into a cold place that you'll hardly recognize, but it's okay. You'll get used to it, and it talks about all of these are our tactics. And, this has been effective somewhat. So we still do this. And we have so much, we have something against so much, and we're only beginning, and it's just this tear down all of the establishments, tear down the culture that exists. And we see that in the culture war with them trying to remake these properties. So the answer is to own as many of the physical media as you can that you care about. Last episode, I talked about the importance of curating your collection. And that means, knowing what you don't really need, to clutter, knowing what's important, to you to preserve. And again, that's just up to each individual. If you have the space, by all means, build your freaking physical media museum in your basement. Far be it from me to tell you not to. But if you're like me, limited space, limited resources, and limited time, which of these am I really going to want to watch and loan to friends and really try to perpetuate? So, you make those decisions for yourself, but then the answer truly is to own the physical media, gather and preserve as much of it as you can. You really think of it yourself as a curator, because not just of your own collection, but you're saving this culture for future generations. And we'll talk about that again in a second. So Disney Club is shutting down. Let me just go back to that a little bit. They did have exclusives. A lot of people, if you're like me, if you're a father like me, or a parent, you joined at some point just to gain a lot of those great Disney classics for your children, to have them on Blu-ray, because Disney, they're changing a lot of things. Now, industry-wise, they're trying to move toward a streaming emphasis in the business. They really want you to be a subscriber to Disney Plus. They want you to think of Disney Plus streaming as your source for all of your entertainment content. And there's some business reasons for that. Maybe certainly easier. It's less overhead, that's for sure, than selling physical media. They have a bit more of a hold on you. You have to come to them. But think about how the ideologues would enjoy that model. They like it because they can control what entertainment you have access to and what you don't. Disney Plus is constantly taking down or will only release this or that. They won't release this movie from their past, but they will release this. And in a lot of cases, as I talked about in the last episode, they will alter the original content. They will go into a film and change a scene that they don't like for whatever reason, child safety or for political reasons. They definitely have those warning signs up, which really are a slap in the face, I think, in a lot of instances. That they're not necessary, to tell you how you need to think about this movie if you're going to be so short-sighted enough to watch it. And I just think it's a matter of time before those films come down altogether or are surgically altered by Disney, because they've already done these kinds of things. The news is that they made a deal with Sony, that Sony would start releasing Disney's physical media for them. And some people have thought, this is great, we're saved, we're going to get so many wonderful titles now, because Sony apparently has a pretty good reputation for releasing, high quality or whatever. I don't know. But that's not really the case. You're not saved in that aspect. That does mean that you will still receive some physical media from Disney, and that's great. But that doesn't mean that Sony's going to go release everything by any means. Disney's still very much in control of what they want released and what they don't. And Sony, in terms of the ideologues of Hollywood, they're no better than Disney, that's for sure. So we need to own the properties. Now, an example of how they'll go in and start changing things, I mentioned last episode how they will try to remake series. They've remade movies. Well, let's just do a live action movie of that animated classic. And let's go in and, by the way, fix some of these, DEI issues that we think are in there, diversity, inclusivity, and all of that, equity. Or they'll simply bring back animated series, like the X-Men. X-Men 97 was a big deal that they released recently, and a lot of controversy about this, because they're not just bringing back this beloved series. They're not just trying to tell new stories in this beloved universe. They're trying to change things. This is the 90s. How can morph even remotely identify as non-binary? No one even used those silly words back then. So they're trying to push that. They're trying to push their DEI, and there's been a lot of other rumors about other things that are going to happen. Apparently, they're going to try and play it somewhat cooler on the first season, and then they'll really hit you with a lot of the changes in the second season, which is a common tactic of them as well, because some people who just can't help but to consume the new content are easily duped into watching it, consuming it, buying it, whatever, and then they'll watch 3 or 4 more seasons and tell you how much they hate it, but they'll still watch it the whole time. So that's a tactic that's common for them as well. But there are rumors that not only is Disney releasing X-Men 97, their new series, and going to try and change it all up according to their ideology, but they're also going to go back in and re-release the old 97 series as quote unquote remasters. We're brushing these up, we're making it cleaner, maybe they'll release it on 4K or whatever. But part of what they're going to do, I guarantee you, is go in there and change the character designs a little bit. However, to whatever degree they're going to do it, I guarantee you they're going to slim down the curves on Rogue. We can't have those problematic. They're going to cover up some of the characters a little bit more. They really are like your church lady grandmother coming in here and trying to censor all of these things they find problematic. And the show wasn't exploitative. I mean, Rogue, for example, I've talked about it on my YouTube channel, and members have talked back, and we've had nice discussions about it, how Rogue is the forbidden fruit in a lot of ways. She's not a sex kitten. That's not the way she portrays herself, but she is a gorgeous character, and she can't ever have physical human touch because she sucks the life energy from somebody. And it's a wonderful love story between her and Gambit that goes on in that X-Men series. So that's a great part of her character. You can't take that away, as they've already tried to. They already have taken it away in the X-Men 97 new series. They've tried to play that down because they find that problematic. It's not in line with their ideology, and guarantee you they're going to change the original series. So this is why right now, if you're an X-Men fan, oh my gosh, go out there and get the DVDs of those original 5 seasons. Find them somewhere, somehow, some way. Get the ones that were released before Disney starts coming out and trying to doctor them, and just remaster them or clean them up, and the 4K crowd will fall into this, hook, line, and sinker, because, oh, well, it's the 4K version. See how well they did the colors. That's not all they're changing. Trust me. And I don't need a 4K. We talked about that last episode. My DVD plays just fine. It's a beautiful series. It's as I remember watching it. Love it. Love it. Warm up my little deep dish pizzas, grab my soda, and it's just like I'm a child watching those wonderful shows again. So you need to own the physical media. That's important. And the last thing I'll say to kind of wrap this segment up is that it is, on the one hand, as I've mentioned, you're preserving culture that was before. Okay, you're preserving these television shows or this music or whatever. You're preserving it as it was intended, as the artists behind them intended them. So you're preserving the real deal without any kind of tampering from censorship and ideologues and whatnot. You're also preserving, in some cases, the very existence of a story that Disney would try to, or another company would try to just simply ignore, try to pretend that that didn't happen. I mean, thank goodness I have my pirated Blu-ray copy of Song of the South. Disney will never, ever release that movie, and it's ridiculous. That movie is an important part of history. It's an important part of civil rights history, even. The awards that those actors won and everything. That's a whole other conversation. But so you're preserving either the existence of these stories and these parts of our culture, or you're at least preserving the original intentions of those, the original incarnations of those pieces of our culture. And I do say pieces of culture instead of just movie or music, because our art is our culture. I talk a lot on my YouTube channel about how, as a society, we hand down our values, our fears, our identity. We hand that down in our culture, and you can look at that throughout the history of man. It's been in religions primarily. When a society would have sort of one shared religion, we're not a society that has one shared belief system anymore. We're a society that's come together to coexist with many different belief systems, or lack thereof. So we need to figure out, how do we still coexist together? How do we still operate as a cohesive society? We still need a culture. We still need some sort of method of handing down our values, our fears, our aspirations, and so forth. And these have to be contextualized in story, because that's how the human brain works. It's not enough just to sit there and teach a certain set of rules. This is one of the reasons why the Soviet era, had so many problems trying to really keep their people in line, and they had to resort to violence and threat and fear, because they took away religion, and they wouldn't let people believe in anything except for this idea of the state, which simply wasn't equipped with all of the necessary aspects that religion gave people. It gave people stories, it gave people hope, it gave people aspirations, and you can't just take that away and say, believe this now. People need their stories, whether in religion or whether fiction. So in the West here, we have shared universes of fictional stories. And it doesn't mean that everybody's a Star Wars fan, and that's what our culture is now. It doesn't mean that everybody's a DC superhero fan or whatever. But we have enough, whether it's Disney princesses or Disney characters in general, or superheroes, or popular franchises or whatever. We have enough shared stories where enough people know different things about different ones, and it does kind of generally gel together and operate. The entertainment industry has operated throughout the 1900s as a shared culture. And that's why it's so important to preserve it. It's important to preserve it not just for the past, for what it's been, because you might say, well, so what? We've got a new culture now. Why can't we just, what's the problem? Why do we need the old to have the new? Well, because anybody will tell you, you need to understand your past. You need to understand your history. Anything new has to stand on the foundations and the shoulders of what's been. But we're not just having a natural development of culture. What we have now isn't just, you just like the things of the past, but you're not with the things of today because you're getting older or whatever. That's not the issue. What we're having now is a heavy-handed dictatorial, what am I trying to say? They're trying to arbitrarily tell you what is culture and what isn't, what stories you can watch now and what stories you can't. I mentioned Soviet era. I know it's very different. We're not in the Soviet Union, for crying out loud, but it's the same kind of principle, in that a lot of these companies are trying to forcefully take away these stories. These stories shall not be part of your culture anymore. You can have you can have Strange New Worlds. You can have the Marvels. You can have, and so forth. If you want the old thing, we'll kind of brush it up and clean it up and dissect part of it here. Okay, there's a Frankenstein version of the old thing for you, so you can still feel like you have some nostalgia. Or we'll remake it. We'll remake it and fix a lot of the things we think need to be fixed about it. So it's not that it's just, the old culture is giving way to the new. It's that the new isn't any kind of culture. It's not going to do the same work. It's not going to hold us together. It's not going to keep those values perpetuating into the future. It's very much a good analogy of it is if you've ever read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And if you haven't, you need to. It's such an important book. The premise of the book, it was set in, a unfortunate future in which people would burn books. Books were dangerous. So they were burning books. They just wanted you to watch television, let their ideas seep in there through that way. But you weren't allowed to have books. And a resistance started to grow up, and the resistance would commit books to memory. And by the end, you meet all these different people, and this is, oh, that guy's the Book of Job. Oh, that guy's Huckleberry Finn. Oh, that guy's this, because they had committed, they had like focused on one work, and they committed it to absolute memory because they realized it's too dangerous to even try to hold the books or to write it down. If you rely on that in this universe, someone, the firemen, so to speak, are going to come in at some point and find it and burn it up. So the only way to do it is to commit it to their hearts and minds, to commit it to memory, to memorize every word. Then one day the hope was when things are a little better, they would be able to write these things down again and preserve these wonderful ideas and culture and books and whatnot. And I think in some ways, us trying to preserve our physical media collections and curate it and keep what's important to us, in some ways, it's very much like that. Let's hold on to it so we have the real deal incarnations of these, so that one day they can be, viewed again. Now, we're not in any kind of post-apocalyptic Fahrenheit 451 extreme universe, but the idea is still there. I can show my nieces or my daughter, the original version of this movie that hasn't been doctored by this or that or whatever. And, that and you can look at individual instances of this or that, and you think, well, what's the big deal? Well, it's the principle. Even if you look at one instance, which isn't maybe that big of a deal, let them keep going and put a lot of those little not big deals together, and they become a big deal. And it really does become something that affects our culture. So own your physical media. Own what's important to you. If X-Men's important to you, go out and find those X-Men copies. Take a look at the Disney Movie Club exclusives. Go ahead and online and look and see if there's anything that you would really like to own. I don't know for sure if Sony's going to carry all of those over and still release all those Disney exclusives. We don't really know yet. As of the time I'm recording this episode, we don't really know which titles Sony's going to continue to release or start with or whatever, or might release in the future or not. But I think we can read the signs of our culture. We can read the signs of the industry and get a pretty good idea of what we need to hang on to and what we need to preserve.